let's have a demonstration. What can I tell you that I haven't already covered? Like this is, pretty much this loop. So I just want to cover this real quick, and then we will get to our challenges. So just to go over the pieces once again, we have the App Store. If we go to boot.ts, we are adding items and selected item reducer into our provide store. And then if we go to the stores folder, we can see these in action. So let's focus on selected item. This is just returning a method to the store that when an action item gets fired, it evaluates the type and then does something. This is the simplest possible operation that you could do. And if we look at the item store, it's a little bit more complex, but it's just more of the immutable operations that Scott talked about. So in this case, if you want to create an item, you simply just use the spread operator and concatenate this in. For updating an item, you can use state.map, and I'm looping through. Finding the object that I want, I'm using object.assign to return a new object. And then to delete, I'm using filter. So I just loop through, I return a new collection minus the item I want to delete. Yes?
So this is sort of maybe a meta question. Every time I've seen this, both in using React and now today, it's basically a copy and paste when you want to work with a new store.
Mm-hmm.
So everything looks the same except for changing, for example, item to widget. Global
Yes.
workplace. There's got to be a better way than copy paste.
You know what? You are absolutely correct. So one of the criticisms for Redux, mainly by Andre Staltz, is that there is a lot of boilerplate, that you do a lot of the things over and over. So I know there are people working on reducing the boilerplate. Because, for instance, if you know the model, you should be able to kind of generate, like this is a convention that you can follow fairly easily. So I know that actually Rob is working on this, on the NGRX, that you simply say, here's my data model, or here's this model, and it will generate the reducer for you, for the basic things. I mean, like create, read, update, and delete, like that's standard. And so I know Rob's thinking along those lines. Eric Schafstall, or Contra, who did Gulp, he was showing me some of his tooling for the same exact thing. He's like, I love Redux, but it's a little too, I don't want to say crufty, but it's like you're writing a lot of the same code over and over. So there are people working on this because they're like, yes, this is a little bit verbose. So you will start to see some of these things just automatically being generated for you on the fly. But to Scott's point, that I think it's important to kind of understand what's happening under the hood so that you can grasp kind of the essence of Redux or whatever you're doing. And so in that sense I'm glad that I took the time to kind of go through and type these things out.
Sure, but the next time when we're doing the widget thing, I'm going to just global replace, and I haven't learned a thing.
Well, so to that is I do recommend, I would say, at least type it out once or twice so you build up the muscle memory. But there's nothing that would keep you from saying, I'm just going to copy this in the next challenge and say, let's just replace, item with widget, and we're good to go.
Put it in a snippet manager and keep it for.
There it is.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And so that is, I also recommend that. So pro tip is once you understand this to where it's like, I don't have to think about this anymore, then by all means create a template for it. And I know that this exists for Atom and Sublime. WebStorm is my IDE of choice, and it's really easy to create, live templates. And actually, I have a new version of WebStorm I downloaded. I was too afraid to install it, lest all hell breaks loose. But I know they have new and improved Angular support, which I would imagine includes a bevy of live templates. So I'll find out after this workshop. But definitely, I do think, even though it's a bit verbose, I think of it as doing piano scales as a child. When you're learning how to play the piano, sit down, do your scales, get a feel for it so that you understand it, and then you can start to automate it. But your observation is absolutely spot on. It is very verbose, and you should, you could do it a live template at least. Yes.
Having trouble understanding where state comes from. Those look like parameters, but they're not, right?
So it is, when it gets called initially, you can set state here, or you can set it in when you call provide store.
When you call dispatch or any of those, all you're passing is
So you're not-
type and payload.
Right, so the store is keeping track of the initial state for you. So you're not actually allowed to ever touch state ever again. And so this gets passed in once, so the initial state, and then,
Where does that get passed in?
so in this case, I'm just defaulting this to an empty array. But if I wanted to set the state, and so this is that, so one is I'm setting a default parameter so that if it doesn't exist, it doesn't blow up. In boot.ts, like if I had a specific data structure I wanted to start out with, then, so let's say I had like an empty like items collection or something I wanted to do it, then I could just do this in here. And when this was initialized, it would initialize this reducer with this state. So the initial state goes in, and after that, the only thing you ever send is an action item or an action type and an action payload that then the reducer is responsible for generating new state off of that. But the only time that state actually goes in directly is on initialization.
So that provide store right there creates a store based on the composition of your reducers. So therefore, there's like a store that you can't see that exists in your application. So when you call store.dispatch with the action, that action is passed into that reducer function with the state. It grabs the latest state for you, or the current state, I should say, and passes in your action. So you don't have to do it. So I can see the disconnect because you're only passing an action. Where's the state coming from? Right. So when you call dispatch, it's not directly calling the reducer. There is something inside of dispatch that is passing in the current state along with your action that you dispatched to meet your reducer.
Yeah, so store is doing some of that for you, but you only have to worry about sending it in initially, but store will track that, and then everything just kind of goes into the reducer to do that.
Actually, it looks like state gets passed in every time because you're returning a function that has, well, technically two parameters, the second one being a destructuring, that destructures type and payload. And so state is always the first parameter in that function.
Yes.
It is always getting passed in.
But the store is doing that.
Yeah, correct.
So you only directly pass that in initially,
Oh,
and then,
every time it calls this
yeah, so the
function
store then,
on dispatch.
yes.
Okay.
So when this provide store is spun up, is it will go through and take these reducers and essentially combine them, I believe, into one large reducer. That is, these actions get dispatched. It's maintaining a reference to the state, and so it's calling this method here. So it calls this. So it's just a reference to this, and this is what it calls. Is it says, hey, I have this items reducer. I'm going to call this, pass in the state and the action, and if anything happens, if this matches up in here, then go ahead and return me something to replace as a pointer, or just give me the default state or the existing state. There's no need to do anything because you've basically passed me an action type I don't know what to do with. But so you never call the items or any reducer directly. You're basically dispatching an event with a payload, and that calls basically the store that then calls your reducer. Does that make sense?
Getting there.
Getting there.
Might need to do a module on reducers.
Maybe. So if you come back tomorrow.
Booking my flight now.
Yeah. And so we saw registering the reducer here. And then let's go to our items component. You can see that we are then, anytime you want to pull something out of it, you inject the store. And then you can do, for selected item, it's just store.select. And then you can pass that into, or you can do whatever you want. In our case, we're passing it into the item detail component. Or if we actually go here, items, within the item service, it's doing the same exact thing. It's simply saying in this item service, it's saying this dot items equals store dot select items, and then it's doing some additional things.